What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Rewired Soul podcast. It's your host, Chris Boutte, and we have such a great episode today. My guest is Robin Hanson, and I don't even know how to put this into words, but check it out. This is one of the most important topics, in my opinion, one of the most important topics I will ever discuss on this podcast. All right. So this week I'll be posting some more episodes. So make sure that you stay tuned. But I believe this conversation with Robin Hanson sets the foundation. And you're like, why? Why, Chris? Why is this so important? Why is this such a critical subject for us to talk about? Well, Robin Hanson, he co-authored a book called The Elephant in the Brain. And as many of you know, back in 2019, I was canceled on YouTube, and I was just so dumbfounded by human behavior. I was like, why are people doing this? Why do you post this? Why do you post that? But I started to take a step back and start seeing things everywhere. I'm like, why do people post what they post on social media? Why do people buy that kind of car? Why do people buy those kind of clothes? Why do people say these kind of things? Why do people do this? All these things. And I started to think, I'm like, is this just people signaling? Are people trying to signal what part they're in, their political affiliations? Are they trying to show people their wealth, their status, all these things? I had these questions. So I came across The Elephant in the Brain. I was like, boom, this is it. This is the book. So we'll dive into it. I talk about it in this conversation with Robin Hanson. But the subtitle of The Elephant in the Brain is the hidden motives of everyday life. So basically, Robin and his co-author, their theory is that we evolved to kind of deceive ourselves and have these hidden motives, and we're constantly signaling about who we are and what we're like and all these other things as a way to, increase our social status or get a mate or whatever it is. And I'm telling you, once you start seeing the world through this lens, so many things start making sense. And I love this book so much. I ended up reading it for a second time recently before Robin came on, and we dive into so many topics like why do we spend so much money on going to doctors and taking medicine when the research shows that certain things are not as effective as we believe they are, right? Why, do we go to college? Why do we rack up student debt, just tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars when there's no guarantee of it getting us a good job? Why is it that people buy us presents even when we tell them that we would rather have cash? And why do we buy people presents and not even know if they're going to like it? Why do we do so many things? And it all circles back to signaling. And like I said, we have more episodes this week. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking about moral grandstanding with Justin Tosi and his phenomenal book. And I have Megan Daum coming on. But this conversation really sets the foundation. And I'm telling you, the book will be linked down in the description below, along with Robin's Twitter and everything like that. Make sure you grab a copy, because I'm just telling you, this book will help you see the world in a brand new way. And as we'll discuss in this podcast, the problem is a lot of people would rather not learn about this stuff for very good reasons. Like, it's easier to lie to ourselves. But anyways, I had to do a longer intro and set this thing up because, like I said, I believe this is such an important topic. So anyways, if you enjoy this, make sure you pick up a copy of the book. And if you're not yet, make sure you're following me over on Twitter and Instagram so you don't miss any of these upcoming episodes. All right. But I am going to shut my mouth and introduce you to Robin Hanson as we talk about his book, The Elephant in the Brain. Boom. There we go. All right. So today Hold on one sec, actually. Oh, there we go. All right. So today I am joined by Robin Hanson. How you doing today, Robin?
Great. Happy to be here.
I am so happy you're here. I recently reread The Elephant in the Brain. So just real quick story. I came across the book when I was just really looking at the world, and I was kind of just thinking, I'm like, it seems like so much of what we do is just signaling. Like just looking on social media, I'm like, why did you post that? Right? Like
Yeah.
why do you say what you're doing, what you're eating? Why do couples post these happy pictures when behind the scenes they're not happy and stuff? It's like it seems like it's all a show. And then I came across The Elephant in the Brain. So you are going to do a much better job explaining it than I am. So
And it's so much worse than you thought.
yeah. And now, and that's what we're going to dive into, because I feel like I'm analyzing everything now. But can you kind of explain to those who haven't read the book yet what The Elephant in the Brain kind of is, what piqued your interest in kind of learning about this?
So I am a professional economist, a professor, and I've been doing social science for a long time. And as social scientists, we try to study lots of different areas of life, medicine and school and politics, etc. And in each of these areas, our standard theories often have a lot of troubles explaining what seems to be going on. We have a very simple standard theory and we apply it, and it doesn't work that well.
Mm-hmm.
And we struggle a lot. We invoke all sorts of alternative assumptions and more complicated models and saying, well, the world is subtler than you think, and look at all these other effects. But I came to realize that you can actually explain a lot of these puzzles relatively cleanly and simply if you just go right back to the basics and say, maybe people aren't doing things for the reasons they say.
Mm-hmm.
What if when people go to school, it's not about learning the material?
Mm-hmm.
What if when they go to the doctor, it's not about getting healthy? What if when they vote, it's not about making their country or state better off?
Mm-hmm.
What if people just have much more mundane and selfish reasons to do each of these things? And once you look at those possibilities, they just stand out as completely plausible, and
Mm-hmm.
they fit with a lot of the data. But oddly, we didn't notice that. It's the elephant in the room about our motives, i.e. the elephant in your brain, the thing that you kind of know is there or would know if you bothered to look, but you look the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book is about explaining to you all these motives you've been hiding from yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and other people have been hiding from themselves, so that you can understand the world around you in a much clearer, direct way.
Yeah. And so yeah, like I guess my first question, like, so if I'm understanding correctly, a lot of us were doing things for kind of selfish reasons, different intentions and motives, but we don't always realize it, or we don't talk about it. And I guess my question to you is, you know, is it a good or bad thing to be self-aware of this? Because like since
it's a great
learned
question.
about it, I'm sitting here and everything I'm doing, I'm like, I'm aware
Right.
of it. I don't know if it's good or
So the
bad.
theory here is that evolution designed you to be ignorant of these things.
Mm-hmm.
It decided that you could pretend better if you didn't really know.
Mm-hmm.
So we say that your conscious mind is not the king or president of your mind making the key decisions. Your conscious mind is the press secretary. Its job is to make up a good story about what you're doing to present to other people. And for that, it's maybe better off if you don't know what's really going on, so you can be more creative and sincere in coming up with the stories that you do. So the key question is, was evolution right about you now and your priorities now? So if we were really finely evolved, where evolution, took fine details of your behavior and really honed them exactly to get everything right for your life and your environment, and if your priorities were the same as evolution's priorities, then you should not want to know if evolution didn't want you to know.
Mm-hmm.
Which case, I'm doing you a disservice by telling you all this, and maybe you should turn us off right now.
Yeah. I think at one point in your book, maybe even in the intro where you explain it, you guys are writing the book and you have these motives, you want to present yourself in a certain way and things like that. And, right before we jumped on here, I was thinking about it because, so at the time of recording this, tomorrow I'm 9 years sober, right? And I got sober through 12 step meetings, and they taught us about self-seeking, right? And that's acknowledging that I'm only doing something to get something out of you, right? And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I've been pretty selfish, and I only like do favors for people to get something in return, and most of my life, and I need to become a better person and stuff. But as I continued to stay sober and change my life around, I think that's when I started to notice it. I'm like, wait, everything I'm doing is to help me, right? Because
Yeah.
in 12 step programs,
Right.
the
Well,
12 step is to be
I mean, that's
assertive.
usually seen as wise and thoughtful of you to say it sort of privately to yourself or in a moment of reflection. But if you just go around honestly telling everybody I'm just a selfish bastard and I'm going to do everything for myself, they won't appreciate it.
Yeah.
So they want you to pretend like you
Mhm.
have other motives. And you kind of want to pretend like you have other motives because that'll go over better for you. So a key question is, who should read our book then?
Yeah, there we go.
What we would say is, first off, among ordinary people, some of you have higher priorities for understanding the people around you. You might be a manager, you might be a salesperson. And so it might be just really important in your role that you actually understand the people around you better than you otherwise would. You also just might be kind of nerdy like me, where when you sort of go around and do the thing that seems intuitive, it's not very smooth. It's not very slick. You're just not very good at it intuitively. And so for those people, it might be better at least to consciously think through some of the reasons for the usual behavior. So you can actually, do it a little better. And then, for someone like myself as a social scientist or someone who's a policymaker, if you've told the world that your reason for existing is to go study existing, human social practices and institutions and recommend how to improve them, then it's really on you to know what's going on.
Yeah.
If you are just completely misunderstanding the nature of school or medicine or politics, and then you propose reforms in these areas, you just won't know what you're talking about. So you should suck it up and look at the ugly truth about what we're really doing so that you can do your job.
Yeah, I've been really interested in just self-deception lately, right? We lie to ourselves constantly, and I see the evolutionary benefits. Like, if we didn't have this confidence that we could achieve something, why would we pursue anything? And prior to launching this podcast and speaking with authors and everybody like that, I was doing mental health content, addiction recovery content, and something that you see a lot especially like in a self-help space, is self-awareness. Self-awareness is key. And
but they don't really mean it.
Yeah. So what do you think they mean?
Well, I mean, I think there is a point of view about yourself they want you to accept, and it has some negative elements, but it's not full self-awareness.
Yeah.
They want you to take on an appropriately, pro-social attitude. So if you were, for example, overly selfish, they want you to admit and know that you really want to be more caring for other people. And that's the awareness they want you to really come to, which may not be true. So you'll have to sort of put on a new face or show to become the supposedly self-aware person that they want you to become.
Yeah. So I guess, a question I have. So once I read the book and became a little bit more aware of this, and I started reading more and learning more about just like group selection and things like that. And you start learning about reciprocal altruism, right? Like, we're doing things and hope to get it in return. So do you think that, or even in your own life, now that you've come to learn more about our selfish motives, can you see like, okay, well, it's worth it because it helps promote group cooperation? Like, even if we're being selfish, it is for this kind of greater good because we're helping one another out so we can succeed together.
I mean, there are some elements that promote cooperation, but not mostly.
Like
mostly it's relatively selfish. But I mean, let's just go back to basics. How much should you be trying to change yourself? So, our book is trying to tell you what the world is like mostly. It will then indirectly tell you what you are like, but our book is not a self-help book. We're not trying to tell you how to reform yourself or that you should reform yourself. We want you to get a rough idea of what the world's like. So, I mean, what I would say is get a clear picture of other people,
Mm-hmm.
and then assume you're like them.
Yeah.
Don't even bother to like dig deep and look at yourself, because that's really hard to do. It's
Mm-hmm.
really hard to honestly look at yourself, and you've got all these parts of your mind that will resist that and cover it off and hide it.
Mm-hmm.
And you might even say, well, how important is it? So look, evolution built you as this complicated creature, which it designed to be unaware of a lot of things. You, through your heroic conscious efforts, can't change that much. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You'll have limited abilities to change yourself even over a lifetime. So instead of saying, how can I become the angels I always thought I was, instead of this demon that I've figured out I am,
Mm-hmm.
you should more say, I have a limited budget for honesty. Where do I want to spend it?
Mm.
Where is it most important to me that I be honest? Where in my life does that matter the most? So for example, if things seem to be going wrong in your relationships, maybe you need a little more honesty there. If you're struggling in your career to understand people and your relation to them, maybe a little more honesty there would be useful. Ask where honestly would be valuable to you and to the people around you,
Mm-hmm.
and try to work a bit at more honesty there, and just let the rest of it go.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to be honest about whether you love your mother. Okay.
Yeah.
There's just no point in climbing that mountain if there's nothing at the top. Okay.
Yeah, I've been, I'm really interested in just like trust and lying and stuff like that. And there's a lot of moral arguments for lying, right? Like, whether it's a significant other, if it's your child, if it's your whoever it is, and when one
Right, but those are usually arguments for lying to other people, less about lying to yourself.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
It's harder to come up with moral arguments about why you should lie to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Except for the fact that it's just easy. You're just built for it. It's already there. It's trouble to change.
Yeah, and the easier route is to accept it, because it's how we've been evolving for however many years.
Well, accept it provisionally, and when you first start to ask, well, where is my priority? That is, where would my dishonesty, my lack of self-awareness, be causing the most problems?
Mm-hmm.
And then step into it.
Yeah. So here's what I'm curious about too. So, like obviously, you guys have thought about like who this book, who should be kind of looking at this book and everything like that. But as a parent, my son is 12, right? And, I chased happiness in the wrong ways for a long time just in my life and things like that. And I'm presenting some of the ideas to him. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with like games like Fortnite and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But when he gets his allowance, or around Christmas time when he gets money, he wants to buy all these like skins inside the game. I'm trying to get him to kind of question his motives. Like, why do you want that? Because a lot of these things,
right? Well, he's going to be questioning your motive for wanting him to question his motives, right?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, a 12-year-old, that's the first thing that's going to come to their mind. Like, why does dad not want me to do this? Is he feel threatened because I'm better at the game? Does he feel cut out of my life because he can't participate? Does he just not want me to have fun and wants me to do homework all day? I mean, this is just the nature of human relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're all actually really good at looking for the possibility of hidden motives in our rivals around us.
Yeah, but we suck at seeing it.
If there's somebody who we have a conflict with, and the question becomes, well, what hidden motive could they have for taking an opposite side to me? Well, we're really good at coming up with those theories.
Yeah,
they just come to us rapid fire, and they're not actually pretty good. So if you want to find out your own motives, just like flip it around. Like ask yourself, if I were in conflict with a person like this doing this, what would I say about their motives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm wondering, is this one of the reasons for so much of our conflicts? Like when we're trying to help somebody else, we all get really defensive when someone points out something that we might be doing wrong, or
because in fact, when we're trying to help, we often aren't so much trying to help.
What do you mean by that? Elaborate. Like if I'm trying to help somebody else, what might my motive be?
Well, so for example, as you know, parents with young children tell themselves it's good if the children are forced to go to bed early, because then otherwise they won't get enough sleep. And we kind of know what's really going on is the parents just want a little time to themselves after the kids to have their own time. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing for them to want, but they don't talk about it in that terms. They talk as if it was good for the child, for the child to go to bed, and they're making that up.
Yeah. So And that brings me to something you mentioned a little bit earlier, and you have like a whole chapter on this, but about medicine. Can you explain a little about how, us, going to the
Sure.
doctor or giving medicine or treating our kids'
So,
boo-boos or
so
bringing
just
soup?
just to review, the first third of the book is setting up the plausibility of why we might have hidden motives and the sort of
Mhm.
arguments about why they would exist. And the last two-thirds of our book goes over 10 different chapters. Each is a different area of life, where in each chapter we take the usual motive people say and we outline that, and then we describe some puzzles that don't fit very well with that usual motive, and then we offer our alternative motive explanation that fits better with the puzzles, which we say is a more important factor in that area of life.
Yeah.
The medicine is one of those 10 chapters, and honestly, at least for people in the United States, it's probably the hardest one to swallow.
Yeah.
So we'll all have different degrees of troubles with the different chapters. If there's something that's not very sacred to you, so say art is not a thing for you, then you're
Mhm.
perfectly willing to believe that those artists have hidden motives. But art is your sacred thing, then you will find the art chapter much harder to swallow.
Mhm.
Same with religion or school. And so in our society, medicine is pretty sacred for a lot of people.
Mhm.
And so being a little more cynical about medicine is hard for most of us to swallow. So I'm telling you right now, even if you don't buy what I'm about to tell you, there's these other 9 chapters that you will find more plausible.
I can attest to that. Yes.
And so, we basically say we only expect you to buy 7 or 8 out of our 10 chapters. And that's
Yeah.
enough for you to believe that there's a lot of hidden motives. We don't need to sell you on every story. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So now for medicine, if we ask, why do you go to the doctor? Why do you go to the hospital? The obvious explanation everyone will give you is because, there are these disease things that make you sick. And doctor types know ways to fix those, but they're
Mhm.
expensive. And then you need some insurance to cover it. And then you need to know who the good people are. So you need some regulation. And, that's our story about medicine.
Mhm.
And it makes sense on the surface because you don't make up excuses for things, at least unless they make sense on the surface.
Mhm.
That's just the nature of excuses. You can say the dog ate my homework, but you won't say the dragon ate my homework. Why? Because nobody believes in dragons. You don't make up
Yeah.
that excuse. You make up the dog because, well, maybe a dog could have done it, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so for medicine, this is our excuse, and it kind of makes sense on the surface. But there's a bunch of details about medicine that it just doesn't work with. Probably the most dramatic one is the fact that there is almost no correlation between health and medicine.
Yeah.
So in geographic regions where they consume more medicine, they're not healthier.
Mhm.
At least after you control for some other basic things. We do randomized experiments where we give some people a lower price of medicine and other have to pay a higher price. And the people who have a lower price consume more medicine, but they are not healthier.
Mhm.
And so this is a consistent result across a lot of different studies over a long time. And that's got to give you pause. You
Yeah.
thought you were getting medicine to be healthier, but people who get more medicine are not healthier. And it's not the only puzzle that we have here. We also have that people, say, in rich countries spend a larger percentage of their income on medicine. And so when somebody switches from a poor country to a rich country, they suddenly start spending more on medicine, even though their income doesn't change or other things don't change. There's a keeping up with the Joneses effect on medicine.
Mhm.
And there are other things that seem to have much larger effects on health than medicine,
Mhm.
such as air quality, sleep, nutrition, exercise. And if you start talking about those things, people just get bored really fast. They can't be bothered to talk about exercise or air quality. It just doesn't interest them at all.
Yeah.
And if you talk about let's promote these things through policy, people, yawn and say, well, maybe, but, who cares?
Yeah.
But when you go to medicine, all of a sudden everybody cares a lot about medicine and making sure who gets medicine when and, whether it's fair. Even though the correlation between health and medicine is much smaller than the correlation between health and these other things.
Yeah.
So here are a bunch of puzzles that are hard to understand. Another last puzzle I'll mention is just that if, say, you give people who are about to undergo surgery, you give them information about the average death rate of people about to get that surgery under the hospital they're about to have it at, or under the doctor they're
Mhm.
about to have it on, you say, we've got this information. How much do you want for it? How much will you pay? And
Yeah.
$50, only 20% would pay $50.
Yeah.
Everybody else wouldn't even pay $50.
That's
And
crazy.
people just do not want the information. And if you just
Mhm.
give it to them for free, they don't act on it. They won't listen to it.
Mhm.
So people are just remarkably unresponsive to information about the quality of the treatment or the doctor or the hospital, things like that.
Mhm.
They just kind of want to trust.
Yeah.
They don't want to think about it.
So I let's dive into policy for just a minute too, because something that I think about, especially after reading the book and talking about medicine, is there's this huge debate around healthcare, right? And when I look at it, and when we look at like placebo effects too, right? Can we guarantee that more access to healthcare? How much will it improve? Like, obviously it would save lives, but how much of it is not going to be as helpful as we want to
But
believe?
I think we should finish the story of giving them the true motive.
Okay.
Because we told them what the pretend motive was, and we told them the data that like makes that puzzling, but we didn't tell them what the better explanation for the motive is. So our better story of the motive with respect to medicine is showing that you care. We use medicine to show other people that we care about them, that we're willing to spend money on them, time and effort and sacrifice when they are feeling bad, to show them that we are their allies and we're not going to dump them. And we also want to let other people show they care about us. So an analogy would be Valentine's chocolates. So on Valentine's, you have a tradition of giving your lover some Valentine's chocolates. Now, when you decide how many chocolates to give them, you don't ask yourself, how hungry are they? The amount of chocolates you give them isn't really set by their need for it. It's set by your need to show that you're generous. Similarly, in medicine, we give too much medicine because some of it's useful and then much of it isn't. But we keep giving more medicine because we want to show that we care a lot, and we care more than somebody else who cares less than us. And for Valentine's chocolates, if somebody had an opinion about the quality of different brands of chocolates, if they didn't think that you knew about that opinion, or there was a shared opinion, they might not take it into account. So if I get a box of chocolates from you, if I happen to think that's not a good brand of chocolates, but I don't think you knew that, I'm not going to take that, hold it against you. But if it's a brand that everybody thinks is bad, I could hold that against you, because I'm holding you to the standard of what does everybody think is the quality here, because it's a signal of effort, right? As a gift, what matters is the common perceived perception of the quality, not the actual private perceived perception of quality of the chocolate. And so similarly for medicine, what we care is to give people the medical treatments that everybody thinks you should give them. And it doesn't matter so much if we privately think it's better or worse, because it's about sort of the gift and the overall perception of the gift. And if on Valentine's you don't have someone to give you a box of chocolates, you might buy yourself one and leave it on the desk at work.
Yeah.
Why? Because you want to be seen as the sort of person who is cared for in just the way everybody else who is cared for. You want to feel that comfort of feeling like you're cared for. And what that needs is the thing everybody gets. So analogy to medicine, most of medicine is bought by other people. Your employer buys it for you, your family buys it for you. But even if you buy your own medicine, you don't want to be left out. You want to get the signs of caring that everybody else gets.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, one might argue that we're looking for someone who's just a huge proponent of like Medicare for all. It's wanting to be seen as equal, like on a status level. Like, look, we care, we're cared for as much as this other person, or we want the sign that the government cares for us as much as everybody else. Is that? But
absolutely.
We don't admit that.
So I once heard a talk by somebody at the basically the head of the World Bank gave a talk at the TED conference when I was there, and he said there's all these third world countries that want more hospitals, and they ask us for loans for hospitals, and there's all these health experts who say that's a bad investment in poor countries. You need to be instead doing more basic things before you buy more hospitals. And he said, but the poor countries feel like they want the hospitals because that's a sign of respect. That is, rich countries have hospitals, and so they want to have hospitals too. And he thought he just couldn't deny them the hospitals that they needed for their self-respect, even if they weren't actually very medically effective.
Yeah. And that's kind of what's crazy too, is because if we think about just like, rationally and stuff like that, right now there's like processes, things have to get approved through, your insurance company or whoever it is. And there's all these steps. So it's weird just thinking in that context of finding that balance between what is actually needed and what do we want to symbolize that our government respects us and cares for us.
Now, I mean, if you said to yourself, well, I don't care about showing that I care, I just want the medically effective medicine.
Yeah.
Well, then you should probably just cut back a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, just do less. Hold yourself to the standard of, if I had to pay for this out of my own pocket, would I? And if you wouldn't pay for it out of your own pocket, maybe you just don't do it, because that's what these experiments are showing, is that the people who pay for it out of their own pocket, they cut back to a level that doesn't really hurt.
Yeah.
So you could do that for yourself. But I'd say if you're running a company or head of a family, if you cut back on the medicine, your family and your employees will take that as a signal about how much you care about them. Can you withstand that signal of they're not caring? You might say, well, I'm going to give them the salary instead. And that won't necessarily do it.
Yeah.
They still might say, no, you don't seem to care about me, because people who cared about me would want to make sure I got more medicine.
Yeah. And it's all that. It's really interesting, because I look back, like, just on my path of like recovery. And I used to have all these anger issues and stuff. And a lot of it was this feeling that I wasn't cared for. Right. And like, we want people to show us, even, and it's
absolutely.
And it's so interesting.
And they need to do it every day in some sense. I mean, so this was like a thing you learn early on in marriage, which I'm sure you've learned by now. But I had a colleague who will be unnamed here now, but he, was young and married, and he and we talked about signaling, and he said to himself and out loud to the rest of us, well, I'm sure glad I'm not in a marriage where you have to signal all the time that you care about your spouse. We are, we understand that we like each other and care about each other. We don't have to constantly show it. And a few years later, he said, okay, I was wrong.
Yeah.
Because as you know, even if you spent a decade or decades showing that you care about something, they still want you to show them every day that you care more, because they're afraid that this is the day you stop caring.
Yeah.
And the only way to convince them that you haven't stopped caring today is to show them yet again that you care today.
Yeah. In some way, shape, or form. I used to pride myself in being in relationships and picking up on these very small things and getting like a very niche present, like, oh, because this reminds you of this one time, because it's signaling to them, like, look, I pay attention to the very
absolutely
tiny details. And that's something I've been dying to ask you since you agreed to come on here about is gifts and things like that. By any chance, have you read the book Scroogenomics? Because that book really screwed with my head.
I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with the general category of the argument that, yes, of course, gifts are inefficient in the sense that, the dollar value to the person who gets the gift is often less than the dollar value paid for by the person who bought the gift.
Yeah. And that really messes me up. I think I read it last October or November, right before Christmas time, and then, there's all this, and I'm looking at it, and, when you're looking at your money and
some cultures have a different, so signaling is a matter of an equilibrium, and that you're trying to do things that people perceive as showing that you care, but that depends on where you are and what people perceive. So there are some cultures in which giving cash is an acceptable gift, and so it doesn't look bad to give someone cash, in which case you less have that thing. But then they're just going to have some other wasteful signals in their culture that substitute for the wasteful signals in the gift. I doubt you can really find a culture that overall does less signaling. You'll just find them doing different kinds of signaling.
Got it. So you know what? This is actually very relevant since my birthday is tomorrow. So, okay. So we give
happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. so we give gifts to signal, hey, I care about you and everything like that. And like you were just saying, some cultures, there's cash and everything. So tell me this. Prior to my birthday, my mom's like, what do you want? And I'm like, just send me money. Just give me money. I don't need anything. And she's like, no. Right. So I've been getting these little things. She sent me a coffee mug and this little thing for my coffee nook over there. So when
she wants the signal too. So,
okay.
Right. It's not just about her showing that she cares about you. She wants to know that you want the signal from her. She wants the signal that you need the signal from her, that you care, that she cares.
Yeah.
So you're asking for cash, you see, risks her thinking that you no longer care if she cares.
That's do you ever sit back and ask yourself why you like to learn about this? It gets so complicated, right? Because we're like constantly analyzing, like, about this stuff.
Right. Well, we at the beginning you said you like to do podcasts, you just like to learn about everything, and then here's the point where I tell you, well, maybe you don't.
Okay, what am I signaling with this?
Well, I mean, just in general, I think most of us do like to think we want to learn about many things until we actually find out stuff that we didn't want to learn.
Yeah,
and we didn't really expect there was much of that, and there's just a lot more of it than we realize. So here, I mean, I became a professor of economics, and I studied the world because I wanted to understand the world and to make the world better, to figure out better new institutions. I didn't expect to find very many really ugly things as I probed, so I didn't think that was a problem. But I was surprised to learn that the world is in many ways much uglier than I anticipated, much more resistant to change and improvement, and that nobody would reward me for telling them these things. They don't want to hear it, so they're not going to say yay Robin for telling them about it. So I can discover that it's true, but then if I feel obligated to tell everybody the truth once I've discovered it, I realize that that's just going to hurt me because people didn't want to learn this truth. Or at least in general, it would be a relatively niche audience. So I have to be satisfied with finding the niche audience that kind of at least somewhat wants to learn this stuff.
You found me. So that's good.
At least for now. Now, so I told you our book has 10 different chapters on 10 different areas of life. Now, we think you could go on for another 20 or 30 chapters. You could go on to study hidden motives in lots of other areas of life. And we were kind of hoping that somebody else would be inspired by our book to like start in on those other 20 or 30 chapters. But almost no one says, yeah, that's what I want to do. I mean, we talk to a lot of people like you who think the book is interesting, but nobody says to themselves, yeah, I want to know more. Show me more chapters. They are struggling with accepting the 10 chapters we're giving them. They feel proud of themselves for getting through them and being honest enough to look at them. They do not want more. They are not asking for a sequel where there are 10 more chapters.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've noticed that just with my own content, for a little while, I started making some YouTube videos and everything. I like to learn about the psychology of conspiracy theorists and why do people believe these things, and or paranormal beliefs or supernatural beliefs and all these other things. I would make videos about it and people would get pissed, right? And they get upset about this, and it's interesting. So I can only imagine, like, have you have you had people just reach out and debate you about these things because they take the book as a personal attack, or has it done a pretty decent job finding the right people?
No, I think they know that the simple solution is just to ignore it if they don't like it. That is the historical thing. So, I mean, the first thing to say is, humanity is very old. All through history, there have been people who lived their whole lives, and at the end of their life, they understood a lot more about humanity than they did at the beginning. And some of those people have written that stuff down, and they've been called cynics. And all through history, we've had people, often somewhat articulate, write down their cynical descriptions of the world, and people have nodded at that and sort of waved their hand away and ignored it. That's just the way it's gone all through history. So I honestly can't be that sure that we're going to have any different fate.
No, that makes sense.
Basically, everyone kind of knows this is a point of view out there, and they're aware that it exists, and they're aware that other people don't want to hear it. So they don't really need to fight to push it down. They know that everybody else is going to, as soon as they have the excuse or given the opportunity, they will just look away and forget about it. There's no need to repress it.
And something that just popped into my head. I was reading some research the other day talking about how people with depression are a little bit more aware and notice what's going on. But, I perceive myself as a pretty happy guy on a day-to-day basis. I have my up days and down days like everybody else. But do you think that people can kind of, see through this lens and kind of see a little bit more of reality and our hidden motives and still maintain a happy life, being cynical,
Well, again, I think it depends on how much you're focused on yourself and lots of details versus, having a focus. So if you just try to make yourself look honestly at everything you do, that's going to be really hard, and it's not going to go well. I just don't think we have the capacity for that. We are just not up to the task of clearly seeing all of our lies and self-deceptions all through our lives. We're just not creatures
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Maybe we can make robots in the future who had that capacity, but we're just not such creatures.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
But
so interesting.
but if you have a focus, so for example, I don't know what your profession is, but say if you were a teacher or you were a manager or a salesperson,
Yeah.
you could ask, about your particular customers or your employees, what are their motives and how could you help them out?
Mm,
And then you wouldn't have to be, addressing every possible way in which your own motives might not be honest. You have a focus, and that could be empowering because it's part of, what makes you important in the world is this is
mhm.
the thing you do. So I think we're all used to, in our center of our career, it's hard work, at least at some point, to
Mhm.
get good at it, right?
Yeah.
And we're proud of the hard work we did to overcome our reluctance and lack of
Mhm.
skills to get good at something that later on we say, this is one of the reasons the world values me is I can do this. Well,
Yeah.
that's a reason to face your self-deception and hidden motives that are directly related to the thing that you are good at, the thing that makes you special.
Mm.
Yes, it'll be a bit of a sacrifice. It'll be hard work. It won't be pleasant, but that's the nature of getting good at something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that I think about just, since I've worked in the mental health field and in treatment centers, one of the most difficult things that seems to keep people away from, seeking help is that we have to do that self-reflection and look at things that we've been kind of neglecting and, and all that stuff. Well, in 12-step programs, it's the fourth step and that it becomes a total mess. And I remember, my first year and stuff like that, but it's interesting because it's not, I originally thought it was just, people with a traumatic past or dealing with addiction, but it's like a human thing. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like none of us really want to look behind that curtain, and it's difficult.
Right now, there are times when there are particular things we're hiding from ourselves that we need to look at that particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm an alcoholic, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So generically, most of us get along fine, just not looking at all the hidden motives
Yeah.
and not being honest with ourselves about much of anything. Right. Sometimes our dishonesty is, cause some substantial problems, and we're kind of going to need to look at that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so, that's more of a special case, and it's going to be painful. But then we don't look at everything. We
Yeah.
look at just the key things we need to get past that problem.
Mm.
And there's just no way that we're suddenly honest about everything. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Thinking of
Absolutely.
the standard interview question, like, what's your biggest weakness? And somebody
Right.
says, I work too hard.
Yeah.
Right. And are they being honest with themselves? I mean, they're looking in and finding their weakness. I mean, that's all about honesty, right? But no,
Yeah.
of course, that's not honest. That's just finding the best looking flaw
Yeah.
for the interview, right? And that's a lot of our honesty is like that, looking
Yeah.
for like, okay, I'm going to have to come up with some sort of flaw I
Mm-hmm.
admit to. I'm going to have to come up with something. Well, what's the least harmful flaw I could admit to
Mm-hmm.
that will
Yeah.
get me past this?
Yeah. That'll get me the job still. um. So I wanted to ask too. I want to kind of talk about just kind of like I don't know how we try to identify with groups, because I think that's another reason I really dove into the book years ago, not a lot of years ago, 2019. uh I had just a bajillion strangers on the internet going after my YouTube channel and all this, and I think that's when I noticed this signaling too, like, who are you? You're a stranger, why are you doing that? And I think I saw it too, like just during the election season and stuff with the polarization. So can you talk a little bit
Well, so
about
I
the
mean, I think the
signaling?
key thing is that if I say signaling, what most people come to mind is or showing off. People think showing off how smart you are, how athletic you are, how rich you are, how popular you are,
Hmm.
how how many things like that.
Hmm.
But what people don't realize is we actually show off loyalty just as much as we show off ability.
Mm,
Loyalty is just really important in the world, and as you know, most people, it's true that like who you know is as important as what you know.
yeah.
People don't like to admit it so much. They like to pretend otherwise, but people really care a lot about who's loyal to who. And
Hmm.
people put a lot of effort into showing loyalty, not only to their immediate associates, but to larger groups that they feel allied with and that they want people around them to see them as loyal to.
Hmm.
And so that's a very strong motivation. And often people are willing to sacrifice, say, looking smart to look loyal. That's what you are, of course, seeing in many of these internet conversations. You might think, well, what would the smart sounding thing to say would be? Well, it would be to admit that, there's these complications, et cetera. But if you want to sound loyal to your group, well, heck with the complications. You go with the simple story that, makes your group look good, that makes you look loyal to your group.
Yeah. So is that anything that you if anybody's working on that aspect, or if you are, like, when it comes to, just for example, when we're talking about just the last year or so with the pandemic, with the storming of the Capitol and things like that, like it's difficult for us to look at these hidden motives, but there are instances where this group loyalty makes us act not smart, which could harm others. So are we doing anything to be like, okay, we don't got to show you everything, but you got to see how
in almost all eras, people spend a lot of effort showing loyalty. So that doesn't distinguish our era. I would say first of all, I would say the book Elephant in the Brain is not trying to explain trends. It's not trying to tell you how today is different than 20 or 50 or 100 years ago, or even how our country is different than other countries. We're basically saying there's just some very basic patterns all through history everywhere in the world where people don't know what's going on. And so that's the obvious first priority, is just to look at the basic patterns and what we're ignorant of. But it should and does vary place to place and time to time. And so a lower priority, but still a valid question to ask, is how are these things changing over time? So that sounds like what you're asking is, how is signaling loyalty changing over time, say here in the United States?
Yeah.
So one sort of obvious thing that we've seen over and over in history that seems to be playing out again, which is right after a big war with an enemy, we are showing loyalty to us relative to them. And then over time, as we have peace and prosperity and they fade and the threats from them fade, we focus more on internal divisions. And then the loyalty is about my side of us versus your side of us. And even though that comes at the cost of us versus them, you're not afraid of them because them haven't been around for a long time and they haven't done anything and they don't look like they're about to do something. So who cares about them? So I think that's what you're more seeing in the United States lately, is just the slow accumulation of peace and prosperity, which means that they don't matter as much. Another thing that happens during peace and prosperity is inequality slowly increases. Wars destroy lots of things. And so after the war, the world is more equal because there's just less stuff of all sorts. And then in peace and prosperity, we make more stuff and we accumulate more stuff, but some people accumulate more than others. And so, ta-da, you have inequality. So, that sort of roughly explains the last half century or so of say US or even Western Europe history is, peace and prosperity produces more inequality and also more internal divisions relative to external divisions.
Yeah. So do you think, I don't know if you're more optimistic or pessimistic on it, do you think there's any solutions for this, and seeing how?
Well, yes, there are. You just don't want them. Another big war will do it.
Well, I heard, okay, so here's something I was actually thinking about the other day, was I heard people, they feel more connected, like astronauts when they see the Earth, right? We're not seeing like, oh, I'm from this part of the country and that part of the country. We're just seeing the globe. So it's like, with these people like Elon Musk and Bezos talk about shooting people in outer space, like, do you think that'll help fix people, just sending them out to outer space, seeing the globe and coming back?
Clearly, we were actually more focused on space when we were focused on beating the rivals, right? Space was the way we could beat the rivals. We could be better at space, and we wanted to get to space first because space was the key to beating them. So it's the other way around. We were much more interested in and focused on space when it helped us fight a rival. Now that the rivals have faded, we're less interested in space.
Yeah.
And of course, that's one of the things people try to do to get interest. If NASA, say, wants to get you interested in space, they say, well, the Chinese are getting into space. You don't want to let the Chinese get ahead of you, right? Do you?
Yeah. Yeah. So how much do you think competition is one of our motivations? Or is that something even deeper than just competitiveness? You know what I mean? Like, because like
there are different kinds of competition. So within your group, you are trying to show you're loyal, in part relative to other people's loyalty. You're trying to show you're more loyal than them.
Yeah.
You might want your group to compete well against other groups, but to the extent you aren't afraid of other groups. You're more interested in, showing your loyalty to your group or even your faction of your group. So, competition is everywhere, but it takes on different forms. You might think, do I want my company to be competitive with other companies, or do I want my faction inside the company to be competitive relative to other factions? Or do I just want to outcompete my work rivals? Or do I want to outcompete my brother and sister and looking better to my parents, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of competition. The question is just which kinds show up, because sometimes whole groups do a good job of organizing to compete with outside groups, and then they are competitive as a group. And if they can better organize to suppress their internal divisions and rivalries in order to cooperate, then they can have a better competition with an outside group, which is why we often do cooperate more internally when we face an outside threat. And this is really a deep and difficult problem. Humanity has been honed over 10,000 years to have outside threats of war as one of the main processes that pulled groups together and made them behave a bit, and not just the elites could just ignore everybody and just grab everything for themselves, and even ignore the future if they didn't care about outside threats. But outside threats have disciplined that. That means, no, you can't just like grab everything and enjoy life. So, there's a standard story about decadence, which has a substantial truth to it, that societies that allowed their elites to just get lazy and self-indulgent, they were conquered by outsiders. And everybody says, no, we can't allow ourselves and our elites to become like that. We need to remember, discipline, and we need to practice coherence and practice war even, and show that we have a resolve that we would resist an outside attempt. Why? Because if we don't, then outsiders will come and get us, right? But of course, for any one of us, it's more important that we just show that we have the attitude about that sort of thing that other people want us to have, whether or not that helps the group at all, because we don't actually have much influence on the whole group, but we can influence is whether the people around us like and respect us.
It's interesting too. Like now I'm just thinking about just things that we say we want and things like that. Like just the signal our friends give us, like, oh yeah, I'll help you out with this, and it's just to show the type of person that they are, and maybe they're a better friend than somebody else because they're competing with other people in your circle.
Now, a point to be clear. I mean, I think some people get confused about this. You can't show X unless X is true.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so for example, if you're trying to show how athletic you are, you have to be athletic to show athleticism. You can't show that you're smart unless you are smart. And so you can't show that you care unless you care. Okay. So it's not like pretending something you're not. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the things that you actually are, showing them. And it's often your higher priority to show them than to be them, but you can't show them without being them too.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
People who want to show that they care do care.
Yeah.
You can't show something that isn't true.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. And you mentioned intelligence, and this is something I've wanted to ask you about as well. So my son's only 12, but I remember all the social pressures about college, and you're an educator, and you teach others, and I think I heard you mention in the other podcast I just listened to, was it his name, Brian Kaplan, where he has that book, The Case Against Education. And his argument is that education is a lot of signaling. And, when we're spending all this money and all these things, and there's no guarantee for a job after you get through college, all this stuff. My question to you is, I don't know, like, what are your thoughts on higher education when it comes to signaling versus actually pursuing it for education? Like, what
so that's true. I mean, the answer there is like for all other signaling.
Okay.
So school pretends like it's about learning the material that will help you on jobs and other aspects in life later. And to a large extent, that's not true. You don't actually learn that much at school. But what you do is show off and impress people relative to your competitors. And the social value of that is low. So it's not, obvious we should be subsidizing education. Maybe we should even be taxing it. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be trying to go to school and look good compared to other people. Right. And so there's a difference between your private individual incentives and our collective interest.
Mm-hmm.
Collectively, we should probably tax school instead of subsidizing it so much, or at least tax the kind of useless school that we usually have.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, we might even tax medicine because it's actually kind of useless on the margin instead of subsidizing it as we do. But individually, if you cut off medicine from your family, they won't like that. They will take a bad message from you. And similarly, if you don't go to school and do good, and then you try to go to future employers later, they'll say, why should I believe that you didn't go to school because of your high ethical principles rather than that it didn't make you look good? They will be skeptical about your stance. So you're simultaneously, again, this is, the nature of life. Simultaneously, don't hurt yourself individually too much in your competition with other people. But if we can, let's coordinate to help us all together. So let's find a way to cut back on school together and medicine together, even as each of us is sort of doing the best they can for themselves and their family, given the situation we're in.
So let me ask you that. Okay, quick fictional scenario, or maybe you've done this. Let's say you're going to a high school graduation and they asked you to go up there and speak, right? How would you break down who in that audience of graduating seniors who should pursue college and who should maybe go after a vocation or something else? Like, what factors should we take into consideration? Is it our parents? Is it our family? Is it the amount of money we want to make? Like, what is it?
So if we were inclined to a career where a very practical curriculum would just directly teach us that career, like perhaps plumbing or being an electrician or something, well, then it would make most sense to just directly learn that thing and then show everybody that we're good at it. But if the kind of career we want to go into is something where they find it very hard to evaluate people, even after many years, then you're going to want to collect these signs that you're smart and conscientious and conformist and go to a usual school program and pick one that you can manage to suffer through, because of course it won't be very impressive if you don't do a good job there. So I might more think about how we could reform school to be better. So, one thing I might say is, well, look, at these, say during the college years, if we could find a way that you could show off all the same skills that you would show off at college, but actually do something useful, that would be the big win. If you could actually get on some sort of job and training program, but still able to show off your smarts and conscientiousness and conformity in the same way that college does, now it would be less of a waste. Because of course, people are showing off on jobs, even past school. On jobs, people are trying to show off that they did a good job and then they have good abilities on the job. So I would say, well, what's the obstacle? Why can't we show off these things on jobs? And of course, many people just look at that and go, of course you can. But I'd say the problem is work is not standardized to the remote degree that school is. So the thing about school is you go to college and you get, a certain GPA in certain college. People think they know how to compare those, within school and across schools so that they can rank you totally compared to everybody else. And that's just much harder to do on a job. You went on a particular job in a particular city, on a particular company, and you had a particular boss who wrote this letter for you afterwards. How are we supposed to compare that? And that's the problem. Like you will learn things, but we won't know how much you've learned. And so you'll compete against this college person who will give us this credible signal about how good they are compared to all the college people. And there's you, which we don't really know how to compare. And we'll have to assume the worst. We'll have to figure, well, you knew you weren't so good. So you went off and went through the path that would hide your bad qualities more, because it's harder to see how good you are. And then we're going to have to hold that against you. And so the challenge would then be to say, take some prestigious companies like Google or whatever, and have a program where people go work for that company instead of going to college. But then after 4 years, they get a standardized ranking of how well they did in that job. If you could, that's work to do. You'll have to find, standardize the job, standardize the evaluation of jobs, and you need standardizing across companies. That is, you need to have a pool of companies, all of which are participating in this way to rate their, employees who are there instead of going to college, so that at the end of those 4 years, we can produce this standard rating so that whoever's in the top 5%, we could know they're in the top 5%. We could say, look, this was a top 5% worker out of all these companies. And then that person could compete with the top 5% college person, who it's easier to evaluate because we'll say, yes, they're both top 5%. But you know what? This guy who worked for 4 years, he actually knows more stuff about working.
Yeah.
And then there would be an advantage there. But you see, the problem now is, they learned something, but you're not really sure what it was. And you're not really sure how to compare. So that's showing you that sort of the key problems, again, with signaling. If say I care about your health, but instead of buying you medicine, I buy you an elliptical and I go for jogs with you and I get you some nutritional supplements. Well, you might think, well, I guess, he cares somewhat, but they wouldn't know how to compare.
Yeah.
Somebody else got the health insurance package. They know what that means about whether you care. And this package you threw together that's unusual is just going to be hard to rate it.
Yeah,
it's why we do the standard thing.
Yeah, it's when I think about just like going through that process, because another reason, like as we're having this conversation, I'm just thinking, I'm like, I was waiting for your book like my entire life, because I just always had those ideas. Like in high school, I'm like, wait, so I got to graduate high school, get a certain GPA just so this school thinks that I'm good and I'm signaling that I'm a good student, I'm responsible, I go to class, I do my homework, I do this, right? And then depending on the school, that's going to signal to employers, right, that I go to school, I learned this, I studied this, and all these things, and this kind of like this chain.
And honestly, I mean, from my view, it sends kind of a bad signal, right?
How so?
I mean, well, if somebody had been going through those school years, with the main purpose of collecting GPA in order to get a good job later, I think to myself, what kind of a human is that, right? That's all they wanted out of life. So if somebody was going along through school and that was really interested in each topic and studied things because they were just interesting and they just happened to get a good GPA, well, that's going to look better, right? I'm going to think, that person will then have interesting conversations. They will have the initiative. They might start an interesting project at my company if I were hiring them, right? Whereas this person who just always wanted to get that top GPA in order to get into the best school, and now they want to be in my job because it's a top job. Well, what are they going to do here? Well, they're going to just try to be the top employee here. But is that going to be productive? Are they going to be creative about it? Are they going to take an initiative? Are they going to take a chance and help the company develop? Do they care about this thing we do here at the company? Or do they just want to come here in order to, fill out the resume, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think about that too, just in general, like happiness, and sometimes I don't think that we realize that's what we're doing as well, and we're kind of just go on this autopilot. I want to be the best. I want to move up the ladder. I want to do this, and a lot of it's not for any intrinsic motivation, like what we value.
I mean, I think it's worse because often when we buy medicine, say, we are mainly just buying the prestige of the doctor, and so the doctor doesn't actually have to know how to do medicine well. From our point of view, we don't reward them for doing it well. We just reward them for being the most prestigious doctor. So if the medical system ends up, putting the person on the highest pedestal who learns certain somewhat arbitrary things that aren't actually that useful, the system still functions because the rest of us just wanted the top doctor. I care about more of you if I get you a top doctor when you're sick, and it doesn't really matter why they're top or what criteria put them on top. Because I just need you to see that I got the standard top person, because it's about sort of having the standard thing. So in a lot of our area, same way with a lawyer, right? Interestingly, like people mainly pick lawyers based on the prestige of their law firm and their school, and they don't ever actually look at what track record they have, like whether they won or lost cases.
Right.
Nobody bothers to look at that, right? And so why should they try hard to win cases as opposed to lose cases when they need to try hard is get to the top firm and get from the top school, because that's the thing we're all picking on.
Yeah. So is that kind of what we were mentioning earlier, just with the kind of the way the system's set up? Like the better your signal is, the less effort you can kind of put in. Like I look at experts a lot, right, on Wall Street and predictions and analysts, and I love the work of like Philip Tetlock, and you look at it and their accuracy isn't that great. But since they have all this education and they've worked at these, prestigious news outlets or
it's even worse. So have you ever heard of the phrase "too cool for school"?
Yes.
So it's the idea that some students gain in status by doing reasonably well at school, but without hardly trying. And so someone who does well at school, but tries hard, then you look at them and you say, that's not as impressive as this other person who did almost as well, but hardly tried at all. So similarly, you might want the lawyer or the doctor who seems to be a decent lawyer or doctor, but hardly tried at all, because people might be more impressed with that and they put them higher in the ranking. And then you want that person because you're basically buying prestige as your gift to someone else to show that you care.
Do you think there's any kind of evolutionary reason for that we're impressed by people where they do minimal effort and high reward? I know you have a chapter on art and things like that, right? And so me, as somebody who's not a fan of just like I like certain art, but not like, classical paintings or music or whatever. But I look at it and I respect the people who do enjoy it. But I'm like, how much effort did that really take? Did you just kind of get especially abstract stuff, right? But I'm just wondering, are we wired to be impressed by something that seems like minimal effort, whether it's like succeeding in school, in career, but they didn't have to try as hard? Is there any reason for that?
It is literally more impressive.
Yeah.
So the fundamental thing is to say, for most positions of authority in our world, we mainly pick on impressiveness. We don't actually pick on effectiveness. We don't pick the doctor who's the best at keeping people alive, or the lawyer who wins the cases most often, or the teacher who helps you learn how to do things in life. We mainly pick these people on being impressive. And there's a standard ladder they have to climb and standard ways to show impressiveness. And sometimes that ladder actually has them learn useful stuff in the process of becoming impressive, and sometimes it doesn't. But from the rest of our individual point of view, what we just want is them to be impressive. That's what we're buying. We want to go even to the restaurant with the impressive cook.
Yeah.
And does it taste better? We don't really know, but we know it's the impressive cook.
Yeah, no, exactly. I've had jobs where they've taken us out to fine dining and stuff, and I'm like, I don't notice much of a difference except for the price tag on this, and and all that. And something else, just kind of somewhat of a curveball. I don't know, not really. If we're looking at the current system, or just at least in the United States, I'm not so sure about other countries, but when talking about education and careers, do you see our current system set up in a meritocracy, or is there more of rewards for signals and prestige and
well, again, it depends on what you mean by merit. So for some people, impressiveness is merit. The most impressive person is the most meritorious, even if they don't actually do better on some task, you see. So the question is, what counts as merit? What is in fact the most meritorious person for a job? So for example, I like to advocate using prediction markets in companies, basically betting markets, to find out answers to things. And one of the things a prediction market does is it shows you who bets better, who knows better. And the people who tend to win at prediction markets, who tend to earn more cash, they have an ability other people don't have. And you might think, well, that's a valuable thing in the company to find out which people know that better. And people had thought when they introduced these markets, well, we might use that as something we would, as an input to deciding who to promote or, put in positions, because this ability to judge well about, what's going to be true or false is a valuable ability. But what they found is that the people who predict well are just not the people they want to promote. That is, sure, they predict well, but they don't have the right look, and they don't wear the right clothes, they didn't go to the right school, and they don't want those people to be promoted because that's not the kind of merit that they were looking for.
But in the financial sector, isn't that even more irrational? Because wouldn't you want the people who are the best at predicting and making the most money?
You might think so, but it looks like a lot of ordinary investors want to invest in a hedge fund because of the prestige of association they get, and they're willing to lose money to get it. On average, people who invest in hedge funds lose money relative to people just to invest in an index fund, where the index fund, as you know, is just not managed at all. It just sits there and stays in things. So on average, the actively managed funds lose money relative to the non-actively managed funds. Why do people invest in them? Because they get to tell the story of their affiliation with this prestigious fund manager.
Yeah, it's a few episodes ago, I had Brian Portnoy on here because I'm 36 and I only started getting into investing and managing my money this year. And I'm trying to teach my son to get started much older. But I just read so many books and started learning about. I had to learn from square one. What's index funds? What's actively managed? What's passively? What's what's the difference between trading and investing? And I'm looking and so I look at it and I'm just like, okay, so I could just, kind of invest in, like an S&P 500 index fund,
Right.
John Bogle method.
And on average, get a higher return.
Yeah. But then I see so many, all these funds that people are paying their money
Right.
money managers and these high percentages. And I'm like, are they even getting you the results? But so are you?
But I'm saying that results aren't the main thing they want.
Yeah.
They want the prestige of affiliation. They want the
That's
connection there. So they want, if the fund does well, they get to claim, I had the insight in which team to pick. I have this connection to them.
yeah.
And, for example, I went and gave a talk at a hedge fund in New York City, which is a relatively mathematical hedge fund once. And they said, look, we could have a lot more money to manage, but you know what happens? If we take somebody's money, they think they have the right to call us all the time. They won't just invest the money and let us give them a higher return. They think like, I'll have to answer their calls all the time. I don't want to answer that many calls, which is why I don't take that much money. But you can see the calls are the proof of the connection. You can say, I have my money invested in here and I have a connection to them. It's not just me investing money, but I'm connected. We have conversations. We talk on the phone. And, that's my proof that it's not just a hands-off relationship. I have a connection. But that you see that now that's what they're buying. They're buying that connection.
Yeah, you know what that reminds me of? A lifetime ago, in my early 20s, I worked in the car service industry, and one of my buddies, we worked at Ford together, and he went and worked at Mercedes-Benz, and his experience compared to ours was night and day. Because like you're saying, with these more expensive cars, a Mercedes compared to a Ford, they had to be there on call. The customer could call them after hours and ask them about their car and just all sorts of stuff. But that's kind of the bragging rights of owning a high-end vehicle, is you get to say these things to your friends and look at my status. And it's really interesting. Do you think we'd be better off? Like, you're an economist, right? Do you think we'd be better off thinking more rationally about this stuff, like outcomes versus?
Well, the way I would say it is there are collective losses from signaling. That is, whenever so for example, imagine, all of our relative sports ability, right? Mm-hmm. Some of us are better than others, some are worse than others, but unless we go and have sports tournaments, you don't really know who's better.
Yeah.
Now, if we go to a sports tournament, some of us will be shown to be better and others can be shown to be worse. Now, unless the people who are better get much more gains than the people who are worse lose, overall, this is kind of a loss. We're putting all this effort into having these sports contests, and we're just transferring, in some sense, resources from the losers to the winners, but we're not actually like creating value. Now, if there was a kind of job where you just needed somebody who was athletic on the job, then sporting contests would show you who those people are, and there'd be a value in having some system to identify them. But obviously, most sporting contests are going way beyond that. Our sporting system is far larger and more elaborate than we would need just to pick out, say, the most athletic people to be a fireman or something, right? Because it wouldn't be that hard to select the fireman, even without a big, huge athletic system, right?
Yeah.
So it's a way in which we lose on average in order to, show off, because each one of us realizes if I don't try at all in sports, everybody will assume I'm bad. I would rather take my chance at maybe being good if I try, but it's going to be work to try. So we're all losing on average. And that's just sort of a generic story for all the different signaling games we play, right? If we would all just go to school less, then the people who went to school most would still look at the top, but then we wouldn't have wasted as many years in school.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So,
and all the way down the line. So if we didn't work so hard to learn so many words in our vocabulary, then whoever knew the most words would still look the most impressive, but now we wouldn't have to spend all this time memorizing words from the dictionary.
Yeah. So I was recently reading a book called Subtract, and it was kind of talking about how the more effort we put in. So one of the reasons we add, or like if we're looking at fund managers and actively managed funds, are you kind of saying that, it looks more impressive the more work that we're doing, and like it doesn't look as impressive if something's passively managed versus actively managed? So it kind of gives off this illusion.
I think it's more just the actively managed thing might be good or bad, but the passively managed thing is guaranteed in the middle. So if you just accept the guaranteed in the middle, you're sort of showing that you have less ambition and that you don't think you could pick the best one, right? You're trying to show I could pick the better one. I have a better than average ability to pick the better one, but the only way to do that is to pick, and take the risk that it might be good or it might be bad. That's the same way with like sports. You could just say, I've never been in a sporting contest. You know nothing about my sporting ability. You should assume I'm average. And we're going to say, no, since you chose not to even go into sports, we're going to assume you're worse than average.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if I mentioned, but I actually live here in Las Vegas, and it's just making it's a lot of it feels like betting, right? Like
Sure.
you could do the safe bets, or you can be like, okay, higher risk, high reward, and instead of saying like
Absolutely right. Yeah, so I mean that's a stereotype I've seen in movies like Rat Race is a favorite movie of my kids, if you've seen it. But there's a story of one character and there refuses to make any gambles, you see, in the casino, and we're gonna look, and everybody says, well, you're just like a stiff who can't take any risks in life, right? And it's seen as a character flaw that he won't make any gambles at the casino, right? So then the story is, if you are willing to make a gamble at a casino, you're willing to like take a chance, and you're showing some confidence in your ability. Of course, on average, everybody loses because that's how the casino makes their cut.
Yeah, that's how we stay in business out here in Vegas. Yeah. So like, I had one more thing. I don't want to. I could keep you here all day, but I heard you talking about effective altruism, and I want to talk a little bit about that before I let you go. So going back to just we do things for other people to signal and all this other stuff, but we through this conversation we've talked about outcomes and everything, and I've been learning about effective altruism and Peter Singer and all that. So I guess my first question is even if there's signaling involved, if we had to compare effective altruism to other things like just raising GoFundMe money for just some random person, and do we compare those things and say, okay, well, this is the best method? Because it felt like you might have some criticisms of effective altruism, and I like to look at
so there's two separate concepts.
Okay.
First, there's the idea of trying to be effective.
Okay.
You could say, well, do I want to just give money and get social credit for that, or did I actually want to help somebody? And of course, there's the idea that if you actually wanted to help somebody, there might be more work involved. You would have to go figure some things out about what is actually helping. Okay. And so that's obviously true. If you want to actually help people, you'll have to pay more attention to sort of where the money's going and what it's being used for, and looking at some data about how effective it is. Okay. And then a separate question is, there's a social group that takes upon themselves the mantle of effective altruism. And of course, they are claiming that they are going through this extra work in order to figure out what's effective. And the problem you have is, if you're thinking of affiliating with this group or joining this group, is, are they right? Are they in fact being more effective? Because that's the same problem you had with the charities who all claim they're effective.
Yeah.
If they just claim that they're trying to be effective, then they won't actually try to be effective unless there's some discipline where you check out what they're doing and hold it to some standard. So the world of effective altruism started out with, especially a charity evaluator. That is somebody like bond evaluators. There are people who rate bonds for their riskiness. Well, there was a charity evaluating organization who says, okay, what we do is we look at other people's charities and we rate them in terms of effectiveness. They're not our charities, they're the other people's charities. And we are like the bond raters. And so, that you might imagine, just like it's easier to invest in a better bond when there's bond raters, it might be easier to invest in a better charity with charity raters. And so that might be a way that you could cheaply actually be effective, is because you're going to trust the rater. The question is, why do I trust the rater relative to the rate head? It's because, well, they're an independent organization and this is their specialty in life. And so maybe they put some work into it. Now, but then, since then, the effective altruism world has moved more toward, well, we don't want to rate other people's charities. We just want to do it ourselves. And so there are charities who are just saying, we're the effective charities. You should give money to us. And now the question is, well, how do I know you're effective?
Who's rating them?
Well, nobody is rating them. They are rating themselves. And they are inviting you because they are associated with effect, because they quote Peter Singer or show up at the same meetings or whatever, that therefore they qualify. That you should see them as effective and give money to them because they have this social association. And you see, there's a problem there. Just like you might say, well, you want an effective doctor, don't you? Well, so here are the effective doctors group, and they have a meeting let's use one of those doctors, right? And you might say, well, how do I know they're more effective? You might say, how can I get a good auto repair shop, right? Well, what if the auto repair shop had a sign up says, member of effective auto repair shops?
Yeah.
Would that convince you to go to that auto repair shop? Well, you can see if it's just too easy to join the effective auto repair shop group, then that's not really a very credible sign, right? We might more want an independent organization to be rating them, and then they got a higher rating that might be more trustworthy. But them just declaring that they've joined a effectiveness group is, again, not by itself terribly persuasive. So, then the key, you still have to do the work of evaluating, are these people in fact effective? And it's not enough that they give lip service to the slogan.
Yeah, you have to look at the data and all that kind of stuff. And
right. I mean, so just like in a town, there's the religious people who claim they're more moral, right? Well, are they? I mean, you might want to look at how they live and see, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the religious people just claim they're more moral, but they aren't any more moral than anybody else. They're doing all the same things everybody else is doing, but they go to church, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and trust me, that's something I thought about a lot. Growing up in Las Vegas, surrounded by my friends' Mormon families and everything, I'm like, wait a second. Okay, so my last final question for you. This is something that racks my brain, and I don't know if I want your opinion, advice, from just how we live, right? So I think about us doing good for others. So let me just create a scenario. Someone thinks person A thinks person B is a bad person. Person B does some charity and stuff like that, and maybe they've been doing charity for years, right? And you would think person B thinks that person A now thinks that they're a good person, but person A is like, no, you're just doing the good thing, so I think you're a good person. So my question is, in our culture, is it better for us to shut our mouth and just do good and not tell anybody, but then we don't reap the benefits of signaling like, hey, I'm somebody who might be beneficial for you to keep in your circle because I like to help others, right?
So a related point here is anonymous giving. So people might say, well, if you give and then you let people know that you give, well, then you're doing it in order to get the praise of people seeing that you do it. So the real virtuous person is the person who gives anonymously. Now, there are several issues there. One is, well, if you gave and other people saw you give, you might create more social pressure for other people to give. So you might cause more total giving by giving publicly. And that might be overall a good thing because there'd be more effect. And then you might also say, well, look, what happens is sometimes people see somebody helping or giving in a way that seems anonymous, but then of course it isn't because somebody's seeing it. And then they give that person so much more extra social credit. They say, I know that John is an extra good person because I heard that John anonymously gave this big gift and he wouldn't let anybody associate his name with it. But then how did you hear about it? Well, I just happened to get lucky. So basically the fact is when people give anonymously, they almost always let some people know.
Yeah, I've noticed that just about myself. Like, I feel like at least one person has to know. At least one person needs to know I did this good deed.
Because now you're getting this extra social credit from them. You're showing them that you didn't let other people hear. And in some sense, you're basically saying, I care about your opinion much more than their opinion. I'm concentrating my whole signal just on you.
Yeah.
Just so that you will appreciate what a good person I am. And I'm extra good because I'm only showing you and not showing other people.
Yeah. Maybe that's why, if I don't tell anybody else about my good deed, it's my girlfriend. Just like, hey, you picked the right guy. You're with somebody who does good deeds.
So I'll mention the concept of marginal charity. So if you think about charity, we often ask about cost effectiveness. How much benefit do people get relative to the cost to me? And so we, of course, think all else equal, you want to do cost-effective charity, right? That's the idea of effective altruism, say. Well, it turns out that we can find a kind of help that is cost-effectiveness goes to infinity. So the idea is, imagine I'm making a choice and picking a number that's at the peak of some curve, right? Say I'm building a building and I'm building it, my profit maximizing building is 10 stories tall. And I pick that. Now I ask myself, well, what if I deviated a little from this profit maximizing peak in the direction of what would be socially beneficial? Well,
Okay.
the social beneficial curve does not peak at the same point. So that curve is still going up with a positive slope at the point where the other curve hits a peak and is flat. So when you move away from the peak just a slight bit, the cost to yourself is infinitesimal, but you still have this big gain for other
Yeah.
people. So small marginal changes on what you would have done to be selfish in the direction of what is pro-social or helpful has, in the limit, infinite cost benefit. You give huge benefits to other people at a very tiny cost to yourself.
Yeah.
So you might think, well, that's just the sort of charity we should be really promoting. We should be telling everybody, look, try to look at what's optimal for you and then just move it a little bit in the direction of what helps everybody else. Because look, it's hardly going to cost you anything and it's going to give everybody all these other benefits. Now, the problem is it's too easy to claim that you did that when you didn't, right? Because people can't tell exactly where your peak is. You could be doing it what's exactly your private peak and claiming that you moved it a little in the direction of everybody else. So, maybe you built one more floor on your building as a way to help the city have more density and activity. And you say, I sacrificed because instead of building a profit maximizing 10 floors, I built 11 floors. But maybe secretly 11 was the profit maximizing. We don't know. We can't tell you that exactly.
Yeah.
So you can see that there's this huge valuable kind of charity called marginal charity that in fact very few people talk about or encourage or want to claim credit for because it's hard to claim credit for it. And so they're really very obsessed with people just giving a lot and doing a lot rather than the effectiveness.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And when you put it like that too, I think about just the billionaires, millionaires and stuff who, oh look, we gave hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. And then, you see mixed reviews because in proportion to how much they make, how much did they really move? Right? How much was it? Like, how much was your sacrifice?
Right. We're often looking at their sacrifice as the measure of their charity rather than their effect, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at, say, Bezos or his wife, yes, they're giving money to charity, but like they could change their business practices a little bit and benefit us all at a very small cost to themselves.
Yeah.
They may claim that they did that. How would we know? And so we don't give them credit for that, even though it may be sort of the main effect they have, right? They might have a bigger positive effect on the world by how they slightly change their business practices than the money they give away.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, yeah. Like I said, I could talk to you all day, Robin. But before I let you go, and I'm personally curious too. But for everybody out there who wants to find you, where can they find you? Are you working on?
I'm easy to find.
Yeah.
Just Google my name, Robin Hanson. I have a Twitter account. I have a blog called Overcoming Bias. I have some web pages. In the last 6 months, I've been, focused on something called the grabby aliens analysis of where we are in the history of the universe and when we'll meet other creatures out there. And that's a little related to the recent UFO.
Oh, really cool.
Pool of interest, but that'll have to be for another day.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. And I'm going to link all that stuff down in the description below. So thank you so much for your time, Robin. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Take care.
All right, everybody. There you have it. That was my conversation with Robin Hanson. So yeah, if you found any of this stuff interesting, make sure you go down to the description below, follow Robin over on Twitter, grab a copy of this book, read it, and let me know. Let me know after you read it. Tweet at me or tag me on Instagram or message me or whatever. Let me know what you thought. Like Robin said in this conversation, like they might not sell you on all the chapters, but the things that you don't hold so dearly, you might be a little bit more open-minded about. But like I said, I really hope you guys found this interesting because, as I said in the intro, this will change the way you kind of view the world and not only the behaviors of others, but our own behaviors. Like I mentioned it in this conversation with Robin, like now when I'm doing things, I pause and I try to reflect a little bit, or I even reflect on things that I wasn't paying attention to. I'm like, why did I do that? What was my motive, right? Was I signaling? And it's not always a bad thing, but when we're more aware of these things, we have a little bit more control and we can improve and adjust and recognize, truth is a big thing. And one of the things is we lie to ourselves, and sometimes it's necessary, but a lot of the times just by being aware, we can head in the right direction a little bit better. All right, but anyways, again, check out the description down below. Follow Robin, grab a copy of The Elephant in the Brain, and while you're at it, don't forget to follow me. It's also linked down below. I'm over on Twitter and Instagram at The Rewired Soul. And for anybody out there who loves the podcast, or if you're brand new and you found out you love the podcast, make sure that you're sharing this on social media. And if you're not yet, follow it on Spotify or Apple, subscribe to it. And what really helps out too is if you leave a rating and a review. That helps out. We're a couple months into this podcast, and that helps get it out to new people, along with you sharing it with friends, family, and everything like that. All right? So if you want to do that, I'd be greatly appreciative. And for anybody who's interested in supporting the podcast, there's some links down below. You can buy some of my books that I've written over at therewiredsoul.com. You can become a patron. And there's also a link down below for BetterHelp online therapy. That's an affiliate link, and it's a service that I've personally used, and I'm really big on mental health because of my recovery. And as I mentioned, when I recorded this, it was the day before my 9-year sober birthday. But you know, therapy is a huge part of my life, right? And it really helped me become okay with looking at those difficult parts of myself and becoming more self-aware. So if you're interested in this topic that I talked about with Robin, but you're worried about some stuff, therapy might be a good opportunity for you. All right, so check that out down below. But anyways, I appreciate each and every one of you. If you've made it through this entire podcast, it was a long conversation. But like I said, I have so many great episodes coming up this week and in future weeks. And make sure you're following me because I do little teasers and announcements of other authors I'm talking to. And we have so many great conversations coming up. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. All right, be aware of the elephant in the brain, and I will see you in the next episode.